I didn't know how much I needed a break until I found myself pulling into the parking lot of the Grey Hill Hotel. It was an old, run-down place, one of those inns that you'd find at the edge of some forgotten town, where people passed through but didn't stay long. The kind of place you'd drive past if you were heading somewhere better. The Grey Hill had the air of a bygone era, with a cracked neon sign flickering half-heartedly above the entrance, its hum filling the otherwise quiet night. I had been driving for hours, exhausted from a long road trip through the back roads of America, and this was the only hotel for miles. I wasn't one for spooky stories, but the atmosphere of the place sent an odd chill through me as I parked. Something about it just didn't sit right. The front desk was manned by an older man who barely looked up from his newspaper as I walked in. "Room for the night?" he asked, voice gruff like he'd been stuck in the same routine for decades. "Yeah, just passing through," I said, trying to brush off the weird feeling creeping over me. He handed me a key. "Room 103, he muttered without looking at me, and I nodded, taking the key from his hand. His cold, wrinkled fingers felt like they were holding onto it a little too tightly. As I made my way down the long, narrow hallway to my room, the air grew colder. The carpets were worn, the walls yellowed with age, and there was a faint smell of something musty. I felt like I was walking through time, not just a hotel. When I reached the door to room 103, I noticed something strange. The door was slightly ajar, as if it had been opened recently. A sense of unease settled into my chest, but I brushed it off as my mind playing tricks on me. I pushed the door open. Inside, the room was sparse, just a bed, a dresser, and an old television set. There was a small window overlooking the parking lot, and outside, the sky was an inky black, broken only by the occasional flicker of a far-off lightning strike. I threw my bag on the bed and decided to take a quick shower to wash off the road dust. But as I turned the water on, I heard something, a faint tapping sound, like someone was knocking at the door. I froze, shampoo still in my hair. The tap-tap-tap continued, rhythmically, like a countdown. I stepped out of the shower, grabbed a towel, and walked cautiously toward the door. My heart was racing as I opened it, but there was no one there. Just the empty hallway, its flickering lights casting long, ghostly shadows. That's when I noticed it, the door across the hall, room 104, was wide open. I hadn't seen it when I'd walked down the corridor. Curiosity gnawed at me, but I quickly shut my door, locking it behind me, my stomach twisting in unease. I thought about leaving, but something told me I was too far gone. Too late. Whatever was going on here, it wasn't over yet. And as I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to shake the unsettling feeling, the air grew colder. The kind of cold that felt unnatural, as if the building itself was exhaling something, darker. And that was when I heard it again, the tapping. This time, it came from inside the room. I swear I froze in place for a moment. My breath caught in my throat, my mind spinning as I tried to make sense of the tapping. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, but then it grew louder, clearer, coming from the wall behind me. Tap tap tap. A steady rhythm. Like someone was tapping their fingers, inching closer. I stood up, heart pounding, trying to convince myself it was just the old building settling. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The tapping grew more insistent. I turned toward the wall, the sense of something, or someone, being in the room with me clawing at my chest. The lights above flickered, casting erratic shadows across the room. I took a step back, my mind racing through every horror movie and ghost story I'd ever heard. But none of that was real, right? There had to be a logical explanation. I walked cautiously toward the wall, my fingers brushing the wallpaper, worn and peeling. The tapping stopped. Silence. I waited for a heartbeat, feeling every muscle in my body tense, expecting something, anything, to happen. And then, a low, guttural whisper. It wasn't from the wall, but from the air itself, just behind me. Leave. I spun around, breathless, expecting to see someone standing there. But the room was empty. The bed was still made, the television still blank. The silence felt suffocating now, like the air was pressing down on me, pushing me to do something, anything, to escape. I rushed to the door, flinging it open, but the hallway outside was eerily quiet. No sign of life. I hesitated. My feet felt rooted to the floor, as if something were holding me back. The tapping had stopped, but the feeling of being watched never went away. A quick glance toward room 104 showed that the door was still ajar. My stomach twisted as I thought about the room. Could it have been someone in there? I knew I shouldn't, but I couldn't shake the need to see what was going on. My hand shook as I gripped the doorknob of room 104. The door creaked open with a groan, the scent of must and decay rushing to meet me. It was dark inside, darker than the hallway. The window was covered with thick curtains, blocking out any light. The room looked abandoned, with dust and cobwebs everywhere, but there was something wrong about it. Something that made my skin crawl. I stepped inside, the floor creaking under my weight. The walls were lined with old, faded photographs, faces of people I didn't recognize staring back at me. And then I noticed it, on the bed. A figure. A person, lying motionless under a thick, old blanket. I couldn't make out the face, but there was something unnatural about the way they were lying there, too still, too silent. I tried to call out, but my voice caught in my throat. Before I could move closer, the door behind me slammed shut, locking me inside. Panic surged through me, and I scrambled for the door, banging on it with my fists. "Let me out!" I screamed, but no one came. The room seemed to close in on me, the air thick with something that tasted like metal. And that's when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of breathing. Heavy, ragged, coming from the bed. I turned slowly, heart pounding in my chest, dreading what I might see. The blanket began to twitch, as if something beneath it was stirring. A low growl rumbled from under the blanket. And then it spoke. "Leave, now." I didn't need any more warning. I bolted toward the window, trying to force it open, but it wouldn't budge. My hands were shaking, my breath shallow as I realized I was trapped in a room with something not human. The figure on the bed sat up slowly, its face still hidden in the shadows, but the outline of its body was unmistakably wrong, too tall, too distorted, like it wasn't quite shaped the way it was supposed to be. And then the room went black. Total darkness. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face, but I could hear it, the breathing, getting closer, the floorboards creaking with every step it took. Suddenly, the light flickered back on, and I was face to face with it. It had no eyes, just empty sockets where they should have been. The mouth stretched wide, too wide, and when it spoke again, its voice wasn't human. "Get out. You're not welcome here." I ran. My legs were shaking so violently I could barely keep myself upright as I charged toward the door. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my breath came in short, panicked gasps. I couldn't hear anything except the sound of my own frantic movements and that horrible, raspy breath from behind me. I didn't dare look back, my instinct screamed at me to just run. I reached for the door handle, my fingers slipping as I desperately tried to yank it open. It was locked. Of course it was locked. I felt the walls closing in, the temperature dropping, and the sensation of being trapped grew unbearable. The thing behind me, whatever it was closer now, its presence overwhelming. The smell of rot and decay filled the room as I pressed myself against the door, my mind racing, trying to think of a way out. The growl behind me rumbled again, this time louder. And then, closer. It was right there. I could feel its breath against the back of my neck. I slammed my palm into the door, begging for it to open, my thoughts a jumbled mess. But the door didn't give. It was as if it knew I couldn't escape. I turned around in one frantic motion, and in that instant, I saw it fully. It wasn't just tall, it was unnatural. Its limbs were twisted in ways that made no sense, like they had been bent backwards. Its skin was pale and stretched thin, almost translucent, and its face was a grotesque mockery of a human one. The sockets where its eyes should have been were hollow, dark voids, and its mouth stretched open like it was too eager to devour. The stench was unbearable, a mix of decay and something metallic, something wrong. Before I could even process what was happening, it lunged at me. The force of it knocked me to the floor, and I cried out, hands scrabbling against the cold, hard floor in a desperate attempt to push myself away. But its cold, bony hand grabbed my wrist, pulling me toward it with terrifying strength. I thought I was going to die in that moment. There was nothing I could do to fight back. No escape. The world spun, and my breath came in ragged sobs. It felt like time itself had slowed, each second stretching on endlessly as I tried to break free, but it was hopeless. And then, just as suddenly as it had lunged, I heard the unmistakable sound of a door slamming open from somewhere down the hallway. "Hey! Is everything okay in there?" The voice was muffled, but unmistakable. Someone was coming. The creature hesitated, its cold fingers loosening their grip on my wrist as if it wasn't expecting any interference. I took advantage of the split second I had and yanked my arm free. Without thinking, I bolted for the door again. This time, the handle turned. It gave. I didn't question it, I threw it open and stumbled into the hallway, gasping for air. My legs felt like lead as I ran down the corridor, the footsteps behind me fading, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I turned a corner, not knowing where I was heading, but anything was better than staying there. I could hear the sound of the thing following me, its unnatural steps echoing behind me. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to keep moving, to keep running. I found the stairs. Without thinking, I threw myself down the steps, almost losing my balance. My mind was racing. I needed to get out of the building. I had to escape. The voice I'd heard earlier, who was that? Someone else had to be here, someone who could help. I had to find them. The lobby was at the end of the stairs, and I saw the front desk up ahead. The old man from earlier was still there, sitting motionless behind the counter. My heart dropped. He was just sitting there, staring at nothing. I ran toward him, slamming my hand against the counter, shaking him. "Hey! Please, help me!" I screamed, my voice frantic. But the man didn't respond. His eyes were wide open, but he wasn't looking at me. His face was pale, his mouth slightly open. He looked like he was frozen in time, completely unblinking, almost dead. And then I realized something else, something much worse. The room wasn't empty. Behind the man, I could see it. There were more. Other people, standing still, lined up against the walls, their bodies stiff, their eyes glazed over, their mouths hanging open. They were all waiting. Suddenly, the tapping sound came again. It was faint at first, but growing louder. Tap tap tap. From behind me. The thing. I turned around. The hallway was empty. But I knew it wasn't gone. It was still in the building, somewhere, hunting. And that's when it hit me. I was never meant to leave. I looked back at the front desk, my body shaking with terror. The thing that had attacked me, the strange figures, they weren't just part of some nightmare. They were part of the hotel. The Grey Hill wasn't just a rundown place, it was a trap. It was waiting for me to leave, just to bring me back. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the door to the outside. It was ajar. Without thinking, I ran toward it, my feet pounding against the floor, my heart racing faster than I thought possible. I didn't look back. I didn't care. I was so close. I reached the door, pushed it open, and stepped out into the night. The cool air hit my face, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I could breathe. But even as I stepped out into the freedom of the open air, I could hear it. The tapping. And I knew, If I ever went back, it would be waiting for me. Waiting to finish what it had started. I ran. I didn't stop. The hotel loomed behind me like a monstrous shadow, its twisted shape barely visible in the distance, but the deeper I ran into the night, the more I felt its presence. Something was wrong. It felt as if I was being watched, stalked, like the very ground I ran on was dragging me back toward that cursed building. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Every instinct in me told me that if I turned around, if I saw that door opening again, I wouldn't be able to escape. I stumbled to my car, the only thing left between me and whatever hell was waiting in that hotel. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with the keys, the panic still coursing through my veins. I managed to start the engine, and for the first time in hours, I felt like I could breathe again. The road ahead was dark and empty, stretching out before me like a never-ending ribbon of asphalt. My eyes were wide, scanning the rearview mirror constantly, looking for something, anything, that might be following me. But there was nothing. The road was quiet. Too quiet. That's when I saw it, the first flicker of headlights behind me. Just a pair, far off, barely visible in the rearview mirror. But it wasn't just a car. It was a shadow, flickering in and out of sight, like a malfunctioning light. I slammed my foot down on the gas, but the car behind me matched my speed, never getting closer, never pulling away. It was just there, right behind me. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe it was just another traveler, some trucker or late-night driver. But deep down, I knew. I knew it wasn't. The headlights grew brighter. I could see the shadows moving in the car, but there was no shape, no driver, no passengers, just darkness. The air in my car grew thick, suffocating, as if the temperature had dropped several degrees in an instant. My breath fogged up the windshield, and my hands clenched the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I wasn't alone. I swerved the car to the side, hoping to lose whatever was behind me, but no matter how fast I drove, no matter how sharply I turned, those headlights remained glued to my rearview mirror. I could hear the tapping again, faint at first, then louder. And then, louder. The tapping wasn't just from the car behind me. It was inside the car. I could hear it, right next to my ear, soft and deliberate. Tap tap tap. Like fingers drumming against the back of my seat. I snapped my head around, but there was nothing there. The back seat was empty. Nothing but shadows. Leave. The voice rasped, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. It was the same voice I had heard in that hotel room. Low. Menacing. It was so close, I could feel its breath against my neck, chilling my skin. No. I shouted, slamming the brakes. The car lurched forward, skidding across the road before I managed to regain control. The headlights in the rearview mirror vanished, but the tapping didn't stop. It only got louder, closer. I didn't stop to think. I threw the car into reverse, racing backward, desperate to break free. The car behind me remained in place, still, but the tapping was on the roof now. I slammed my foot on the gas again, driving forward, my mind a blur of panic. I couldn't lose it. I couldn't let it catch me. It was a hunting thing. Something that didn't follow the rules of the world. The tapping was everywhere, around me, in the car, in my head, growing louder until I thought my eardrums would explode. Suddenly, the car behind me swerved violently into the lane next to me, and for a moment, I saw it. A face, or what should have been a face, a twisted, gaunt figure, its hollow eyes staring straight through me, its mouth wide open, too wide. And then, the car sped ahead, cutting me off, forcing me into the shoulder. I lost control. The car skidded off the road and slammed into the dirt, spinning, tires screeching in protest, until I finally came to a stop. I was shaken, breathless, but miraculously alive. But the tapping didn't stop. It was now coming from the car itself, as if someone was inside it, pressing against the glass, scratching at the window with sharp, ragged nails. I glanced to the side. There, just inches from me, a hand, pale, bony, fingers contorted at impossible angles, pressed against the window. I didn't think. I just opened the door and ran. I didn't even remember running, just that I was sprinting through the dark, through the empty fields, my feet carrying me away from the nightmare. The night air was sharp, the earth beneath me uneven, but all I could think of was getting as far from that cursed place as possible. I ran without stopping, my lungs burning, the tapping echoing in the distance like a death march. I didn't stop. Not until I reached the road. But even then, as I stood there, gasping for breath, I knew. I knew that I hadn't escaped. It wasn't over. It had never been over. Because as the first lights of dawn began to appear on the horizon, I saw it. The Grey Hill Hotel. It was waiting for me. I couldn't believe it. The sun was rising, a pale streak of light stretching across the horizon, yet there it was, the Grey Hill Hotel, standing in the distance like a phantom from the past, waiting. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I was seeing things, but no, there it was, as solid and real as the ground beneath my feet. How was it possible? I had driven miles away, had escaped it, hadn't I? There was no way it could have followed me. It couldn't have. But yet, the hotel was there, like a dark beacon in the morning light. I backed away slowly, heart pounding, feeling a surge of dread that crushed my chest. The tapping returned, faint but insistent, like a drumbeat in my head. It wasn't just in my mind, it was real. The tapping was coming from behind me, from all around me, closing in on me once again. I could hear it clearer now, and it was louder, faster, tap 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 tap. A rhythm. I spun around. A figure was walking toward me, no, crawling. On all fours, twisted and unnatural, it dragged itself across the ground toward me. Its limbs were bent at odd angles, skin hanging loose and stretched across its bones. The same hollow eyes stared at me from beneath the hood of its ragged cloak. The mouth gaped wide, impossibly wide, and I could hear it breathing, ragged and shallow. It was the thing. The same thing from the hotel. The same thing that had followed me, that had attacked me, that had haunted me from the moment I'd set foot in that cursed place. Leave, now, the voice rasped, coming from the thing, and its mouth twisted into a grotesque smile that stretched unnaturally across its face. I felt my body freeze, terror pinning me to the spot. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. It wasn't just the creature, I knew something worse was happening. The air around me was thickening, suffocating. The ground beneath my feet felt unstable, like it was shifting. I heard it again, the sound of footsteps, not just one, but many. More figures, emerging from the shadows of the trees and the field, crawling, walking, all moving toward me with the same twisted, unnatural motions. And then, from the distance, I saw another shadow. This one was different. It was tall, too tall, and as it stepped into the faint light of the rising sun, I saw it clearly. It had no face. Just a smooth, featureless surface where its head should have been. The figure moved toward the group of crawlers with an eerie sense of purpose, leading them like a shepherd. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The tapping was now deafening, the footsteps surrounding me, closing in. I spun around in a panic, but the figures were everywhere. The thing, the faceless one, the other crawlers, they were all around me. They were circling, blocking every escape, inching closer. And then, I realized something that made my blood run cold. They weren't just after me. They were waiting for me to join them. Join us, the faceless one whispered, its voice a cold, hollow echo. The tapping grew louder, more frantic, like an ancient clock counting down. I felt my body moving against my will, my legs taking slow, unnatural steps toward the group of figures. They were pulling me toward them, not by force, but with an undeniable pull, an invisible thread drawing me to them. My mind screamed at me to fight it, to wake up, but it felt like my very will was slipping away, like I was being absorbed into the nightmare that had followed me since the hotel. I stumbled. I tried to scream, to move, to fight it, but everything felt numb. The shadows around me pressed in, suffocating me, and I felt myself being pulled deeper into the throng of twisted figures. My body moved as if I were no longer in control. "You are ours," the faceless one said again, the voice filled with cold satisfaction. And then, just when I thought it was all over, when I thought I would be lost forever in that dark place, I heard something else. A voice, distant at first, but growing clearer. "Hey! Wake up!" I snapped my eyes open. The road was ahead of me. The sun was rising. I was on the side of the highway, lying on the grass, gasping for breath. My body was drenched in sweat, my hands trembling. I looked around frantically, but there was no sign of the hotel. No faceless figure. No crawling monsters. It was gone. I felt the weight lift from my chest, and I sat up, breathing heavily, trying to understand what had just happened. The dream. Was it a dream? Had I been hallucinating? I stood up shakily, still confused. My car was parked a few feet away, the road was empty, and everything seemed too normal. But the memory of the Grey Hill Hotel, of the thing, the faceless one, of the tapping, it wouldn't leave me. It felt too real. And that's when I heard it again. Faint at first, but unmistakable. The sound of tapping. Slow. Steady. Tap. 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 I turned around. And there, in the distance, barely visible in the fading light of dawn, was the Grey Hill Hotel. And this time, I knew. It was waiting. Always waiting. I felt my blood run cold as the tapping grew louder. It was unmistakable now, sharp, rhythmic, as if it was calling to me, pulling me toward the one place I never wanted to see again. The Grey Hill Hotel, standing in the distance like a grim specter, its shape flickering in and out of view in the early morning haze. It couldn't be real. It shouldn't be real. I backed away, my feet moving instinctively, but my heart was screaming at me to turn and run, to never look back. But I couldn't. The tapping. The thing. The faceless one. They were all pulling me back. And then, I heard a voice. Not in my head this time. Not a whisper, but a shout, loud, clear, real. "Get out of there." I turned, my eyes wide, searching for the source. Standing at the edge of the road was a figure. A man with a flashlight in hand, his face set with grim determination. He was older, disheveled, but he was there. Someone else had found this place. Someone else was trapped here too. "What are you doing?" I shouted, stumbling toward him. "Get out of here. It's not real. It's not real." He turned toward me with a sad, tired expression. "I've been trying to get out of here for years," he said. His voice was hoarse, like he had been shouting for help for far too long. "You don't escape the Grey Hill. You never do." I stared at him, horrified. "Years? He'd been here for years." The tapping grew louder, now echoing through my skull. The thing in the hotel, it was coming. The man pointed behind me, his hand trembling. "We have to face it. There's no running. No escaping. You have to confront it." I looked back, but this time I didn't see the hotel in the distance. It was right there, just behind me, standing tall and imposing. The doors creaked open, like an invitation to hell itself. The tapping had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that hung in the air like a thick fog. "Come on," the man said, pulling me toward him, his grip firm. "We don't have much time." I didn't want to go. I didn't want to face it again. But I knew, deep down, I knew, if I didn't, I'd never escape. The thing would follow me forever. So, with a trembling breath, I stepped toward the hotel. Each step felt like it was dragging me into the past, into the nightmare. The air around me grew cold, unnaturally cold, and the ground beneath my feet seemed to give way, as if the hotel itself were swallowing me whole. As we entered, the doors slammed shut behind us. The hallway stretched out before us, longer than it should have been. The walls seemed to move, undulating like something alive. The old, peeling wallpaper flapped as though caught in a wind that didn't exist. The smell of decay filled the air. "We have to find the source," the man said. "It's in the heart of the hotel. It always is." I nodded, though my heart pounded so loud I could barely hear him. We moved down the corridor, the tapping sound returning, this time from every direction, like it was coming from the walls themselves. I could feel something, someone, watching me, something in the shadows, following my every movement. We reached the end of the hall, where a door stood slightly ajar. The sound of the tapping was deafening now. Inside, the room was dark, filled with the scent of mildew and something worse. The furniture was old, rotting, and in the center of the room was an old wooden chair, its back to us. It sat in the center of the room, untouched, as if waiting. The man stepped forward, but I grabbed his arm. "Wait. Don't," but he wasn't listening. He stepped forward, and as he did, the door slammed shut behind him. I heard the unmistakable sound of something clicking into place, locking him inside. "No!" I screamed, banging on the door, but the tapping had returned, louder than ever. The man's voice reached me, a low groan of pain, followed by a soft, strangled cry. The door rattled. And then, just as suddenly, it fell silent. I stood there, trembling, not daring to move. The room behind the door was still. The silence stretched on, and then the door opened. But it wasn't the man who stepped out. It was the thing. It had taken his form, twisted it, contorted it. The faceless one stood in his place, but now, it was wearing his skin. It smiled, no, grinned, a horrifying, wide smile, and its hollow eyes bore into mine with a malicious glee. "You were always meant to join us," it whispered in his voice, but there was no mistaking the malice beneath the words. I backed away, my mind racing for a way out, but the walls seemed to be closing in on me. The tapping resumed, louder, faster, more frantic. And then, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of the front door creaking open. My chance. I bolted. I ran like I had never run before, desperate for the light, for the real world. I couldn't hear the tapping anymore, just the pounding of my heart in my chest. I reached the door and threw it open, stepping out into the daylight. But this time, there was no escaping the feeling that I was being watched. The Grey Hill Hotel stood behind me, silent and still. I ran away, but deep down, I knew the truth. It wasn't over. It had never been over. The hotel would always be there, waiting. Always.